They laughed when they got the money in the house, and all I got was Grandpa's old grill. Summer in Lubbock. Texas is a special kind of hell. The air hangs heavy like a wet blanket, and the heat ripples off the pavement in waves that distort reality. It was in this suffocating atmosphere that I found myself standing in a cramped lawyer's office, watching my family circle like vultures around Grandpa Earl's will. I'm Jack Harper, 37 years old, with some gray starting to show in my beard and calluses on my hands that tell the story of a life spent fixing things. Or at least trying to. The auto shop where I'd worked for 15 years shut down last month. Another victim of the big franchise that opened across town. Now I was jobless with $2,500 in back rent hanging over my head, like those storm clouds that gather over the Texas plains before all hell breaks loose. Earl Harper wasn't rich by any stretch, but in our little corner of Lubbock, he was legendary. Not for his bank account, but for those Saturday barbecue gatherings where his ribs made the neighbors forget about their diets and Johnny Cash records played until midnight. The man knew how to live. Every weekend, the smell of hickory smoke would drift across the neighborhood, a beacon calling everyone home. The lawyer's office felt too small for the collection of Harpers crammed inside. My mother sat quietly in the corner, hands folded in her lap. Uncle Roy with his ridiculous cowboy hat that probably cost more than my monthly paycheck, leaning against the wall with that smug smile I've hated since childhood. My cousins Travis and Becky whispering between themselves, already counting inheritance money they hadn't received yet. The 1965 Mustang convertible goes to Roy Harper, the lawyer read, adjusting his glasses. Uncle Roy's face split into a grin, so wide I thought his face might crack. No surprise there. He'd been eyeing that car since I was in high school. The savings account and bonds are to be divided equally among Travis and Becky. The lawyer continued, naming my cousins specifically. I could feel them practically vibrating with excitement beside me. The reading went on. Mom got the house. Cousin Becky got Grandma Ruth's jewelry collection. Travis got the hunting rifles and fishing gear. Everyone was getting something substantial. Property, money, collectibles worth thousands. I sat there wondering why I'd even bothered to show up. Earl and I had been close when I was younger, but family relationships have a way of drifting as the years pass. And to my grandson Jack, the lawyer said, finally getting my name, I leave my Weber grill from 1963 in my personal notebook and the keys to my trailer on the edge of property. The room went silent for about 3 seconds before Uncle Roy let out a bark of laughter, so loud it made the lawyer jump. Jackie boy got the short end of the stick again. That old rust bucket? It's barely worth hauling to the scrap yard. Travis leaned over, his voice just loud enough for me to hear. Man, he couldn't even leave you something decent? That grill's older than you are. The contempt in his voice was thick enough to spread on toast. The lawyer cleared his throat and continued, I give these items to Jack because he's the only one who understood that barbecue isn't about dollars, it's about soul. I felt a lump form in my throat as the lawyer handed me a rusted key, a worn leather notebook, and some paperwork for the trailer. Uncle Roy was already making plans to take his new Mustang for a spin, while Travis and Becky were discussing what they might get for their bonds. Sorry, Jack, my mother whispered as we left the office. I know you were hoping for something more. Her eyes were sympathetic, but I could tell she was relieved the house was hers. She'd been worried Earl might have left it to someone else. I clutched the key in my pocket as I walked to my beat-up Ford pickup. Another month, and I might not even have that if I couldn't make the payments. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly, and sweat trickled down my back as I climbed into the truck. The vinyl seats were hot enough to fry bacon. Why had Earl chosen me? The question rattled around in my head like a lone marble. I hadn't been special, just a regular kid who liked hanging around his grandfather. But then a memory surfaced. Me at 12, standing beside Earl at that very same grill, watching him tend the ribs with the care most people reserve for newborns. Jack, he'd said, his hand heavy on my shoulder, life's like hickory smoke. You gotta wait for it to wrap around everything. Can't rush it. Can't force it. Just gotta let it do its thing. His eyes had crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Most folks are too busy chasing dollars to understand that. That evening, I drove out to Earl's property, now technically my mother's property, to check out the trailer. It sat at the far edge of the land, a faded aluminum box that had seen better days sometime around the Nixon administration. The key stuck in the lock, requiring some jiggling and creative cursing before the door finally swung open with a creak that would have made a horror movie director proud. Inside, it smelled like dust and old vinyl records. A small kitchenette, a narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs, and a tiny bathroom. Not much, but it beat paying rent I couldn't afford. Sitting on the table was a cassette tape labeled Folsom Prison Blues. I sat down at the table and pulled out the worn leather notebook the lawyer had given me earlier. With the cassette tape beside me, I began flipping through the pages of Earl's notebook. Between snippets of Johnny Cash lyrics and rough sketches of Elvis, I found notes about barbecue techniques, with selection, temperature control, meat preparation, and there, in the middle on a page all its own, was a recipe titled Smoky Gold No. 9, with a list of ingredients and proportions. Earl's legendary sauce, the one that had people coming back to his BBQs decade after decade, the one recipe he'd never shared with anyone, not even Uncle Roy, who tried to bribe it out of him for years. As I sat in that dusty trailer, memories washed over me like waves. Grandma Ruth singing along to Ring of Fire, while neighbors danced on the lawn. The smoke from Earl's grill mixing with the star-filled Texas sky. The way everyone seemed to forget their troubles for a while, drawn together by food and music, and that indefinable thing Earl used to call the spirit. I ran my fingers over the grill recipe and suddenly understood. Earl hadn't left me junk. He'd left me a chance. A chance at something I hadn't even known I was missing. At 37, I was up to my eyeballs in debt, considered a family failure, and had just lost my job. But holding that notebook, sitting in that trailer, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Possibility. I put the cassette in an old player I found in a drawer. As Johnny Cash's gravelly voice filled the small space, singing about prison and regret, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Outside, the Texas sky was turning purple with twilight, and the first stars were beginning to appear. True wealth ain't what's in your wallet, boy, Earl used to say. It's what warms your heart when everything else has gone cold. I thought about Uncle Roy, who'd stumbled over a chair while bragging about his new Mustang, nearly crushing that ridiculous designer cowboy hat he wore to look the part of a Texas oil baron, though everyone knew he was just middle management at an insurance company. I thought about Travis, who'd inherited his father's meanness along with his chin, who'd been mocking me since we were kids. Jack can't even start a lawnmower without breaking something, he'd whisper to Becky, not caring if I overheard. I thought about my mother, who loved me but had always sided with Uncle Roy because he was successful and could help her out financially when times got tough. And finally, I thought about Earl, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about barbecue, the patience with which he tended his grill, the joy he took in feeding others. He'd never had much money, but he'd been rich in ways my uncle couldn't comprehend. As Johnny Cash sang about walking the line, I made a decision. I wasn't going to sell the grill for scrap. I wasn't going to sulk about getting less than the others. I was going to honor what Earl had given me, not just the physical items, but the understanding of what really mattered. Grandpa, I whispered into the empty trailer, my voice barely audible over the music. I won't let you down. Outside, a hot Texas wind stirred the dust, carrying with the faint scent of mesquite from a neighbor's grill. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Moving into a trailer wasn't exactly on my vision board for 37, but after doing some quick math with my empty bank account and that $2,500 rent debt, Earl's old aluminum box started looking like a 5-star hotel. It was cramped, sure, but rent-free cramp beats homeless any day of the week. Sometimes life's victories come in strange packages. The morning after my first night in the trailer, I dragged Earl's old Weber grill out from behind a stack of forgotten lawn chairs. The thing looked like it had barely survived a demolition derby, and then been used as a chew toy by a pack of coyotes. Rust patches covered most of the surface. There were small holes emerging in the bottom, and one of the legs was hanging on by what I can only describe as sheer optimism. Well, old timer, I muttered, circling the grill like a mechanic assessing a totaled car. You've seen better days. But fixing things was the one talent I had that no one in my family could deny, even if they'd never admit out loud. The next week passed in a blur of steel wool, WD-40, and a kind of colorful language that would make a sailor blush. I replaced the leg with some scrap metal I found behind the trailer, patched the holes with heat-resistant material from the auto parts store, and scrubbed away decades of rust and grease. It wasn't going to win any beauty contests, but by the end of the week, that grill was standing tall again. I won't lie. As I stood back to admire my handiwork, I felt a swell of pride that caught me off guard. It wasn't Uncle Roy's vintage Mustang, but it was something I had brought back to life with my own two hands. And somehow, that felt more meaningful. With the grill restored, my attention turned to Earl's notebook and the mysterious smoky gold number 9 sauce. The ingredients were all listed in his messy handwriting, but the quantities were vague at best, handful of this, splash of that. At the bottom of the page was a note that read, "Stir it until you can taste the sky." Grandpa, you were a poet, but you sure as hell weren't a recipe writer. My first attempt at the sauce was a disaster of biblical proportions. The smell alone was enough to make my eyes water, like a tire fire mixed with something that had died under the porch a week ago. I dumped it out behind the trailer and watched as even the ants gave it a wide berth. The second batch wasn't much better. It had a bitterness that reminded me of my bank statements, lingering and unpleasant. The third batch was too sweet, like someone had emptied a sugar canister into ketchup. By the fifth attempt, I was beginning to think Earl had played one final joke on his failure of a grandson, leaving me a recipe that was impossible to perfect. But then a memory surfaced, clear as day. Grandma Ruth standing in the kitchen, watching Earl mix his sauce, her hands on her hips. "Earl Harper, you put that black pepper in last, you hear me? Last. How many times do I have to tell you?" Her voice rang in my head like she was standing right beside me. That night, with stars twinkling over Lubbock like Christmas lights strung across the vast Texas sky, I tried again. Following Grandma Ruth's advice, I saved the black pepper for the end. I adjusted proportions based on what I remembered the sauce tasting like as a kid. I stirred and simmered, adding a pinch of this and a dash of that until the mixture turned a rich amber color. The aroma that filled the air was almost transcendent. Hickory smokiness, a hint of sweetness that wasn't cloying, a subtle heat that built slowly rather than punching you in the face. I dipped my pinky in and tasted. And just like that, I was 12 years old again, standing in Earl's backyard, watching him dance with Grandma Ruth to blue suede shoes while the neighbors clapped along. I was a kid with skin knees and no worries beyond whether I get to stay up late enough to see the fireflies. I stood there in the moonlight, laughing like an idiot with tears streaming down my face. I'd done it. I'd really done it. The sauce wasn't just good. It was a time machine in a mason jar. Life's like sauce, Earl used to say. Sometimes you gotta burn your fingers a few times before you find the right flavor. The next day, I decided to test my creation. I'd scraped together enough cash to buy some pork ribs. Nothing fancy, just the basics. As the meat slow cooked on Earl's restored grill, the smell began to drift across the neighborhood. I was so focused on not screwing up the ribs that I didn't notice my neighbor Marge leaning out her window until she practically shouted across the yard. Marge Wilson, 62 years old, was the undisputed queen of the neighborhood gossip chain. If something happened in Lubbock, Marge knew about it before the people involved did. "Jack Harper, is that Earl's sauce I'm smelling?" she called out. "Lord Almighty, I thought I'd never catch a whiff of that again. That sauce is the reason I couldn't fit into my jeans back in '78. Before I knew what was happening, Marge was in my yard with her phone out, recording me as I basted the ribs. "My Facebook friends aren't going to believe this," she declared. "Earl's grandson is carrying on the tradition." Later that evening, Marge showed me her post. "Earl Harper has risen from the grave. His grandson is making the sauce," complete with a video of me at the grill. It had over 600 shares, and the comments section was blowing up. I got drunk and danced on Earl's picnic table back in '82. Those ribs are the taste of my misspent youth. Tell Jack if he don't sell this, I'm personally coming to shake some sense into him. That last comment gave me pause. Sell it? I hadn't even considered that possibility. I looked at my bank balance, a number so low it was almost theoretical, and then at the jar of sauce sitting on my counter. I had $500 saved up. It wasn't much, but it might be enough to buy supplies. The next day, I went to the local butcher and purchased as much meat as I could afford, along with ingredients to make more sauce. I set up Earl's grill outside the trailer and put up a handwritten sign, Earl's Legacy Barbecue, $15 per plate. I figured I'd be lucky to sell a few plates. I was not prepared for what happened next. By noon, there was a line of 30 people stretching from my trailer door. Old-timers who remembered Earl's weekend cookouts. Middle-aged folks who had grown up on his barbecue. Young people who had heard their parents talk about the legendary smoky gold sauce. They all wanted a taste of this piece of Lubbock history. I worked that grill like a man possessed, slathering sauce on ribs, serving up plates, and listened to stories about Earl that I'd never heard before. How he'd fed half the neighborhood during the big storm of '75, when the power was out for days. How he used to slip extra portions to the local kids who couldn't afford it. How his barbecue had been the backdrop for marriage proposals, graduation celebrations, and everything in between. With each story, I felt closer to grandfather I thought I'd known, but clearly had only scratched the surface of. Earl hadn't just been a guy who made good barbecue. He'd been the heart of this community. As I was serving the last customers of the day, my phone pinged with a notification. A comment on Marge's Facebook post from Elizabeth Liz Cole. Jack Harper, is this the same sauce that made me unable to zip up my prom dress in 2005? Because if it is, I'm willing to risk the same fate again. Liz Cole, my stomach did a little flip. We've been friends in high school. Good friends with the kind of chemistry that everyone noticed except us. Or maybe we had noticed, but were too scared to do anything about it. After graduation, she'd gone off to study journalism while I stayed in Lubbock. Now, she was the host of the morning show on the local radio station. I'd hear her voice sometimes while working at the garage and wonder what might have been. I typed back, the very same, Liz. Though if I remember correctly, you were the queen of that dance floor with or without being able to zip up that dress. Her response came quickly. Smooth talker. Some things never change. We should catch up sometime. I want the full story of how Earl's grandson became the keeper of the legendary sauce. We messaged back and forth for hours that night, reminiscing about cruising down Main Street with the windows down and Elvis blasting from the speakers, about sneaking into the drive-in by hiding in the trunk of Bobby Marshall's car, about all the small moments that make up a shared history. As I finally crawled into bed that night, exhausted but with a wallet that was $300 heavier than it had been that morning, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Possibility. Not just a fleeting kind that disappears with the morning light, but something solid and real. The next day, I got up early and made another batch of sauce. Then another. By the weekend, I had a stockpile ready and a plan to sell more plates. Word had spread beyond Marge's Facebook post. It seemed like everyone in Lubbock was suddenly talking about Earl Harper's grandson and his resurrection of the famous sauce. The line on Saturday was twice as long as before, stretching all the way down the block. I sold out in 2 hours and had to apologize to the people I had to turn away, promising I'd be back with more the next day. Sunday evening, after another successful day of sales, I checked my messages to find one from Liz. Okay, I finally got to try it today, thanks to my producer who waited in line for 45 minutes. And it's even better than I remember. Earl will be proud, Jack. Really proud. Her words warmed me more than the grill had all day. I'd never been the golden child of the family. That role had been filled by my cousins with their college degrees and corporate jobs. I'd been the one who just couldn't quite get it together. The perpetual disappointment. But maybe, just maybe, I'd finally found my path. Not the one my family had expected of me, but one that Earl had seen all along. As I counted my earnings for the weekend, enough to make a serious dent in my back rent, my phone pinged with another message from Liz. So, will you ever let me interview you for my show? The Earl's Legacy Barbecue guy is the hottest story in town right now. I smiled as I typed back, name the time and place, but fair warning, I might spill sauce on your fancy radio equipment. Her response made me laugh out loud. Wouldn't be the first time you made a mess, Harper. Remember the paint incident in Mr. Peterson's art class? Yeah, I remembered. Just like I remembered the way she'd helped me clean it up, both of us laughing until we couldn't breathe. As the Texas sun set on another day, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that no artist could truly capture, I sat outside my little trailer, a jar of smoky gold number 9 beside me, feeling for first time in years that maybe, just maybe, things were finally looking up. That little aluminum trailer transformed faster than a caterpillar into a butterfly. With 3 weeks of solid barbecue sales under my belt, I decided it was time to give Earl's legacy a proper home. The place needed an identity, something that would honor what my grandfather built while carving out my own path. I settled on just like Earl's for the name, not exactly winning any awards for creativity, but it felt right, authentic, like something Earl himself might have chosen if he weren't too busy actually making the food to worry about branding. First order of business was giving that faded silver trailer some personality. I sold my old pickup truck. Sentimentality couldn't compete with the $3,000 I got for it, especially when the alternative was watching my budding business wither before it had a chance to bloom. The truck had been reliable, but it wasn't going to feed me. Earl's Sauce could. With cash in hand, I approached the Lubbock Farmers Credit Union for a microloan. $5,000 isn't much in the business world, but to me, it might as well have been $1 million. I promised to pay it back within a year, my voice steadier than my nerves as I outlined my business plan on the back of an old receipt. The loan officer, Mrs. Gonzalez, had apparently been a regular at Earl's weekend cookouts. She stamped her approval before I finished my pitch. "Just don't mess up the sauce," was all she said, sliding the paperwork across her desk. The transformation began with a coat of cherry red paint that could be spotted from 3 blocks away. I installed a modest neon sign that read Barbecue and Soul that hummed and glowed like a beacon in the Texas night. Inside, I mounted a vintage record player and started collecting vinyl. Elvis, Johnny Cash, Jerry Lee Lewis, the soundtrack of Earl's glory days. Instead of printed menus, I used a chalkboard just like the one that hung in Earl's kitchen. The offerings were simple: ribs, brisket, pulled pork, and sides that Grandma Ruth had perfected over decades. No fusion cuisine or fancy plating here. Just honest food that spoke for itself through taste rather than presentation. With the physical space ready, I opened for business properly. Every morning, I fired up that restored grill, and the aroma of smoky gold number 9 wafted through the neighborhood like an invisible Pied Piper. The smell alone drew people in, but it was the flavors that kept them coming back. The lines kept growing. What began as a weekend curiosity became a daily pilgrimage for Lubbock locals. More surprising were the stories they brought with them. Pieces of Earl I never knew, fragments of his legacy tucked away in the memories of strangers who felt like family as they shared. An elderly woman named Dorothy brought a yellowed photograph of Earl serving barbecue from the back of his pickup after the big tornado of 1970 hit the east side of town. 3 days he cooked nonstop, she told me, her weathered fingers tracing Earl's figure in the photo. When the power was out and food was spoiling in freezers across town, your grandpa fed everyone he could reach. Didn't take a dime for it either. A middle-aged man in a worn cowboy hat shared how Earl had given him his first job cleaning the grill when he was 14 and desperate to buy his mother a birthday present. "He overpaid me by about $20, the man recalled with a misty look in his eyes. Pretended it was the agreed amount when I tried to give it back. With each story, the picture who Earl had been grew more complex and impressive. He wasn't just a guy with a good barbecue sauce. He had been a cornerstone of this community, someone who understood that food was about more than filling bellies. It was about connection. In Earl's notebook, among recipes and musings, I found a line that kept repeating in my head as I worked. Barbecue ain't just meat. It's memories on a plate. The more I cooked, the more I understood what he meant. People weren't just coming for food. They were coming for a taste of something they thought was lost forever. Inspired by the stories of Earl feeding the community after the tornado, I decided to start Sunday suppers, a weekly event where seniors could eat for free. The first Sunday, I expected maybe a dozen takers. Instead, the place was packed with folks in their golden years, all with their own Earl stories to share. Old Fred, a Vietnam vet with a permanent scowl and hands gnarled from decades of ranch work, became a regular. He'd sit at the same spot every Sunday, methodically working his way through a plate of ribs before giving me a gruff nod that I came to recognize as his version of high praise. "Earl would have hugged you for this, son," he told me one day, his voice gruff as sandpaper. Coming from Fred, this was equivalent to a standing ovation. The radio interview with Liz was set for a Wednesday morning, to be broadcast live from just like Earl's during the morning commute. I spent the night before cleaning every surface until it gleamed and preparing samples of everything on the menu. Sleep wasn't an option. My nerves wouldn't allow it. Liz arrived with her producer an hour before they were set to go live. She looked exactly as I remembered, but somehow more confident, more vibrant, more everything. Her smile hit me like a Texas sunrise, warm and promising and lighting up corners of me that had been dark for too long. "Jack Harper," she said, surveying the transformed trailer with obvious approval. "You've gone and surprised everyone, haven't you?" The interview itself was a blur of questions about Earl, the sauce, and how a mechanic had transformed into a pitmaster overnight. We fell into an easy rhythm, just like we had in high school when conversation flowed between us as naturally as water downhill. During a commercial break, I was showing Liz how I applied the sauce to the ribs when my elbow knocked against the jar, sending a splatter of smoky gold number 9 across her jeans. My stomach dropped as I grabbed a towel, apologizing profusely. But Liz just laughed, that full-body laugh I'd always loved, and dabbed at the stain with her finger before licking it clean. "Still the same Jack, creating delicious chaos wherever you go," she teased. "But I have to admit, this is the tastiest mess you've ever made." After the broadcast, Liz stayed to brainstorm ideas for the business. Her marketing mind was sharp, and she understood instinctively what made Just Like Earl special. "You should call the brand Smoke and Memory," she suggested as we sat together at the small table inside the trailer after closing. "It captures exactly what you're selling, not just food, but a connection to something meaningful." We talked for hours, long after the sun had set, and the only light came from a neon sign outside and the small lamp on the counter. Her laugh was melodic in the dimly lit space, reminding me of "Love Me Tender," playing on Earl's old record player. I caught myself watching her more than was polite, noticing how she gestured with her hands when she got excited about an idea, how she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. She was like Earl's sauce, I realized. Perfect when you least expect it, complex in a way that didn't need analysis to be appreciated, and something I'd been missing without fully understanding what I'd lost. As Liz was leaving, she hesitated at the door. "This place is special, Jack. What you're doing here matters." The sincerity in her voice made my chest tight with something I couldn't name. The following weekend brought record sales and a visit I should have anticipated, but somehow didn't. Uncle Roy's Cadillac Escalade stuck out in the gravel lot like a peacock at a chicken farm. Flashy, unnecessary, and impossible to ignore. He strolled past the waiting line like he owned the place, his gaze sweeping critically over the trailer I'd poured my heart into. The same designer cowboy hat sat atop his head, and his ostrich skin boots probably cost more than all the equipment in my kitchen combined. "Jackie boy," he drawled, shaking his head with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Who would have thought? You actually made something work for once." I continued serving customers, not giving him the satisfaction of dropping everything for his grand entrance. "What can I get you, Uncle Roy?" "On the house, of course." The words tasted bitter, but Earl would have fed him. So I would too. Roy waved away the offer. "Not here to eat, Jackie. I'm here with a business proposition." He pulled me aside, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "This little operation you've got going, it's cute, real cute, but it's never going to reach its potential with you running it solo from a trailer." I knew what was coming before he said it. "I'm prepared to invest $50,000 for a 50% stake. We move this to a proper restaurant space, get some real marketing behind it, maybe franchise down the line. The Harper family could be the next big thing in Texas barbecue." The offer hung in the air between us. On paper, it made sense. Roy had business connections I would never have, capital I couldn't access, and the kind of polish that opened doors. Just like Earl's could become something bigger than I'd ever imagined. But then I remembered Roy at the lawyer's office, laughing at the junk Earl had left me. I remembered decades of dismissive comments and condescending pats on the head. I remembered how he'd never once asked Earl for his sauce recipe when he was alive, but now saw dollar signs in it after his death. Heritage is like fire. Earl had written in his notebook, "You pass it along to keep it burning, not store the ashes in a jar." I looked Roy straight in the eye. "This isn't about money, Roy. It's Earl's dream, not your wallet. I appreciate the offer, but no thanks." The friendly facade dropped immediately. Roy's face hardened into the expression I was more familiar with, the one that had always made me feel about 2 inches tall at family gatherings. "You think you can make this work on your own? Please. You'll run this into the ground like everything else you've touched. You're in over your head, Jackie." "Maybe," I admitted, "but at least I'll sink or swim on my own terms, with Earl's legacy respected the way he wanted it." Roy's jaw tightened. He straightened his hat and turned to leave, but not before delivering a parting shot loud enough for the customers in line to hear. "You'll come crying eventually, loser. And when you do, the offer won't be nearly as generous." He stomped back to his Escalade, the customers parting like the Red Sea before his anger. As he peeled out of the parking lot, I noticed old Fred watching from his usual spot, a rare smile creasing his weathered face. "That man's britches are so tight, he can't see past his own importance," Fred commented dryly. "Your grandpa would have been proud of you just now, son. Real proud." As the day wound down and the last customers left with full bellies and satisfied smiles, I cleaned the grill one final time. My mind kept replaying the confrontation with Roy, wondering if I'd made a colossal mistake. $50,000 was life-changing money for someone who'd been worried about making rent just a month ago. While scrubbing a particularly stubborn spot, I lost my balance and toppled backward into the rain barrel I kept behind the trailer for emergencies, soaking myself from head to toe. Sitting there in the barrel, water dripping from my nose, I couldn't help but laugh. "Earl, if you're up there watching, I hope you're enjoying the show," I said to the darkening Texas sky. Because I'm either the smartest or the dumbest harper who ever lived, and I'm not sure which. But as I dragged myself out of the barrel and changed into dry clothes, I felt a certainty settle over me. The trailer with its red paint and neon sign, the record player spinning Elvis, the chalkboard menu, and the sauce that connected generations. This was exactly where I was supposed to be. Roy could keep his designer hat and his $50,000. I had inherited something far more valuable from Earl. Not just a recipe, but a way of understanding what truly matters in life. And that was something no amount of money could buy. 2 weeks after I told Uncle Roy to take a hike, just like Earl's was humming like a rock concert on Saturday night. The red trailer with its neon sign had become a fixture in Lubbock, with lines forming before I even fired up the grill each morning. Turning down that 50 grand was starting to look like the smartest decision I'd ever made, though my bank account was still in recovery mode from years of neglect. I was deep in the rhythm of a busy Friday lunch rush, slathering smoky gold number 9 on a rack of ribs while humming along to Jailhouse Rock, when I noticed a teenager pointing his phone at me. Nothing unusual there. People had been taking pictures since day one. But this kid was different. Filming deliberately, directed me like a Hollywood producer. "Could you flip those ribs again? And maybe say something about the sauce?" he asked, not even looking up from his screen. I played along, flipping the ribs with an exaggerated flourish and saying something about how Elvis himself would approve of this flavor profile. The kid, Connor, I later learned, thanked me and disappeared into the crowd. I forgot about the whole thing until 3 days later, when Liz called me at 6 a.m., her voice crackling with excitement. "Jack, have you seen it? Please tell me you've seen it." I had no idea what it was, but Liz quickly enlightened me. Connor, local high school senior, and apparently some kind of TikTok influencer with a food review channel, had posted a video of me and my barbecue with the hashtag Earl Smoky Gold. The 60-second clip showed me in my sauce-stained apron, joking about Elvis while working the grill, followed by Connor's almost religious experience trying the ribs. It's gone viral, Jack. 2 million views and climbing. People are going crazy over your 1963 grill. And that sauce. You're trending. I didn't fully understand what trending meant until I opened Just Like Earl's that morning to find a line that stretched around the block. The crowd was different. Younger, many from out of town. Phones at the ready. They showed me comments from the video. Is that really a Weber from 63? Legend. Texas barbecue is my religion, and I just found my church. Where is Lubbock and how fast can I drive there? This man is the keeper of lost wisdom. That weekend was a blur of smoke, sauce, and selfies. I sold out by noon both days, leaving scores of disappointed social media pilgrims vowing to return. I hired my first 2 employees just to keep up. Miguel, a culinary student who worshipped at the altar of traditional barbecue, and Darla, a retired school teacher with organizational skills that made the military look sloppy. The real shock came Tuesday morning when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number from New York. A producer from Food Network was on the other end, speaking a mile a minute about authenticity, heritage cooking, and the power of story. We want you for our new show, America's Hidden Kitchens. Can you be in Austin next week to film a segment? I nearly dropped the phone. Food Network? Me? The same Jack Harper who once set his mother's kitchen on fire trying to make boxed macaroni and cheese? Life has a sense of humor that rivals any comedian. The trip to Austin was my first time leaving Lubbock in over 3 years. I packed Earl's notebook, his old Elvis records, and enough ingredients to make Smoky Gold No. 9 on national television. Liz drove me to the studio, giving me a pep talk the entire way that was equal parts encouragement and threats about what she'd do if I froze on camera. Just be yourself, she insisted, squeezing my hand as we pulled up to the studio. That's who people are connecting with, not some polished chef, but a real guy honoring his grandfather's legacy. The filming itself was surreal. They had recreated a version of my trailer setup, complete with a vintage record player. I cooked ribs while Love Me Tender played softly in the background, sharing stories about Earl and his philosophy on barbecue being about love more than technique. Halfway through demonstrating how to apply the sauce, I managed to catch the corner of my apron on the grill, sending a small flame running up the fabric. Without thinking, I patted it out and quipped, and that, folks, is an optional step, the flame-kissed apron technique. Adds character, not flavor. The crew burst out laughing, and the host declared it the most authentic moment they'd filmed all season. Sometimes being a natural disaster has its advantages. The segment aired 3 weeks later, breaking viewership records for the time slot according to the gleeful producer who called to tell me the news. Just Like Earl's wasn't just local anymore. It had become a destination. People were making detours on road trips just to try the legendary Smoky Gold sauce. Over the next 3 months, I made more money than I had in the previous 3 years combined. Just over $12,000 in profit after expenses. Not exactly retirement money, but for someone who'd been dodging bill collectors a few months prior, it felt like winning the lottery without buying a ticket. Fame is smoke, Earl had written in his notebook. The real fire is what you're stoking it for. I kept those words taped to my bathroom mirror, a daily reminder that all this attention wasn't the point. Honoring Earl's legacy and creating something meaningful was. The real game changer came in the form of Joe Watkins, a local farmer who'd been supplying me with produce since the early days. Joe was 60-something with leathery skin that told the story of decades under the Texas sun. He'd been friends with Earl since high school and watched my rise with what seemed like personal pride. Earl always said you had the touch. Joe told me one morning as he delivered a crate of onions. Said you understood food was about more than eating. Coming from Earl via Joe, this felt like receiving a posthumous blessing. Joe stopped by later that week with something other than vegetables on his mind. He had a business proposition. $20,000 to open a second Just Like Earl's location in Dallas, where his daughter lived. He'd handle the business side. I'd train the staff and provide the recipes. A partnership that would expand the brand while keeping its soul intact. I've got money sitting in accounts doing nothing but collecting dust and pennies. Joe explained. Rather invest in something with heart. Something Earl would have been proud of. We shook hands on the deal, and suddenly Smoke and Memory, the brand name Liz had suggested, was no longer just a local phenomenon, but a growing Texas enterprise. The Dallas location would take time to set up, but the plans were in motion, spreading Earl's legacy further than I'd ever imagined possible. Liz and I celebrated with a dinner that wasn't barbecue, a novel concept after months of smelling like smoke perpetually. Between the radio show, which now featured regular updates on Just Like Earl's, and my increasingly hectic schedule, our time together had been limited to quick conversations and working meals. This was our first real date, though neither of us called it that. To Earl, she toasted, raising her glass, for seeing something in his grandson that everyone else missed. And to Liz, I added, for believing in that grandson when he barely believed in himself. Her smile in that moment was worth more than all the viral videos and TV appearances combined. Of course, success attracts attention. Not all of it welcome. About a week after news of the Dallas expansion leaked, Marge from next door still maintained her position as Lubbock's unofficial town crier. Uncle Roy made another appearance. This time he brought reinforcements. My cousins Travis and Becky. They arrived during the afternoon lull, when the lunch rush had ended but dinner prep hadn't begun. Roy's face was a mask of faux friendliness that didn't reach his eyes. Travis looked bored. Checking his watch every 30 seconds like his time was infinitely valuable. Becky at least had the decency to seem uncomfortable with the ambush. "Jackie, boy," Roy boomed, arms spread, wide like we were old friends. "Business is booming. Dallas expansion, Food Network, social media sensation. You're practically a celebrity." I wiped my hands on a towel, already knowing this wasn't a social call. "What can I do for you, Roy?" "We've been talking as a family," he said, emphasizing family, like it was a club membership I'd somehow earned despite years of being treated as the black sheep. "And we think it's time to formalize things." Travis stepped forward, suddenly interested now that the conversation was turning to business. "We're prepared to offer you significant capital for expansion. Franchising opportunities, merchandising, bottling the sauce for retail. All we need," Becky added softly, "is the recipe and a controlling interest in the brand." There it was. They hadn't come to celebrate my success. They'd come to claim it. I looked at them standing there in my trailer. Roy in his designer Western, where that had never seen a day of ranch work. Travis in a business suit that probably cost more than my monthly take-home. And Becky dressed like she just stepped out of a country club luncheon. They were the very picture of success by conventional standards. And yet, I felt nothing but pity for them. They still didn't get it. The grill, the sauce, the music, the stories. They weren't just assets on a balance sheet. They were pieces of a man who had understood what truly mattered in life. "Earl left these things to me," I said quietly, "because you all only saw dollars where you saw soul. Nothing's changed there, has it?" Roy's friendly facade crumbled like a sandcastle at high tide. "You think you can do this without us? You're nobody, Jack. A mechanic playing restaurateur. This is bigger than your little trailer now. You need us." I thought about the people who line up every day, not just for food, but for connection. About Joe Watkins investing his retirement savings because he believed in what I was building. About Liz supporting me every step of the way. About Earl trusting me with his legacy. "No," I said simply. "I really don't." The confrontation ended with Roy storming out, Travis threatening vague legal action, and Becky lingering just long enough to whisper, "They're talking about opening a competing barbecue place with similar sauce. Be careful, Jack." A warning that told me at least one member of the family still had a conscience. I barely had time to process the family drama when an invitation arrived that changed everything. The Texas Hill Country Barbecue Festival in Austin wanted Just Like Earl's as a featured vendor, not just participating, featured. The event was the Super Bowl of Texas barbecue, with pitmasters from across the state competing for bragging rights and industry recognition. Preparing for the festival consumed the next month. I experimented with variations of Smoky Gold No. 9 for the competition entry, finally settling on a version that added a hint of local mesquite honey, a twist I thought Earl would approve of. Joe helped me design a mobile setup that captured the essence of the trailer, but could be transported to Austin. The festival itself was a sensory overload, dozens of smokers and grills creating a haze of fragrant smoke over fairgrounds, country music blaring from speakers, and thousands of barbecue enthusiasts sampling their way through Texas's finest offerings. Just like Earl's booth, with its red and neon aesthetic and Elvis soundtrack, stood out among the more traditional setups. The judges made their rounds mid-afternoon, solemn-faced men and women with clipboards who gave nothing away as they tasted each entry. I served them ribs with the smoky gold number 9, explaining the heritage behind the sauce and the legacy I was continuing. As the day wound down and the award ceremony approached, I spotted a familiar face in the crowd. Uncle Roy, watching from a distance with an unreadable expression. Our eyes met briefly before he turned and disappeared into the crowd. Whatever he was planning, it would have to wait. The head judge took the stage as the sun began to set, golden light bathing the fairgrounds. Awards were announced for various categories: Best Brisket, Best Ribs, Best Original Sauce. With each announcement that wasn't my name, I felt a mixture of disappointment and relief. Just being here was victory enough for a guy who'd been dead broke a few months ago. And finally, the head judge announced our Best in Show Award, recognizing exceptional quality, technique, and soul across all categories. I wasn't even listening properly anymore, already mentally packing up my station and planning the drive back to Lubbock. This year's Best in Show goes to a newcomer who reminded us all why we fell in love with Texas barbecue in the first place. Jack Harper from Just Like Earl's with his smoky gold number 9 sauce, a living legend. The crowd erupted, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I registered Liz screaming my name. My feet carried me to the stage seemingly without input from my brain. The trophy they handed me, a golden smoker atop a wooden base, felt impossibly heavy in my hands. Standing on that stage, looking out at a sea of faces I didn't know but who somehow knew me, I had one crystal clear thought. Grandpa, we did it. Earl, who'd seen something in his unremarkable grandson worth betting on. Earl, who understood that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars. Earl, who knew that food made with love could bridge any gap. As the applause washed over me, I spotted Uncle Roy at the back of the crowd. For just a moment, I thought I saw something like pride flicker across his face before he turned and walked away. The Texas sun was setting behind me, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold that matched the trophy in my hands. In that moment, standing on that stage with the weight of Earl's legacy fulfilled, I finally understood what he'd meant about smoke and fire. Fame might be smoke, insubstantial and quick to dissipate, but the fire that created it, the passion, the connection, the love, that was something real, something that could warm you long after the smoke had cleared. The 6 months following the Texas Hill Country Barbecue Festival felt like riding a tornado, exhilarating, terrifying, and impossible to control. That golden trophy sat on my counter in the trailer, catching the morning light as I prepped for each day, a reminder that Earl's legacy wasn't just alive but thriving. The Dallas location had opened under Joe's watchful eye and was already drawing lines that rivaled the original. Between the two locations, we were clearing nearly $30,000 in profit, a number that still didn't seem real to a guy who'd been dodging bill collectors less than a year ago. My bank account had gone from sad to respectable, and for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't living paycheck to paycheck. But success has a funny way of showing you what matters. Despite the money and recognition, I kept coming back to the same realization. The trailer was too small for what smoke and memory had become, not just physically, though the lines wrapping around the block suggested that was true too, but spiritually. Earl's legacy deserved a proper home. Jack, Joe said one evening as we counted the days take, I think it's time we put down roots. A real restaurant in Lubbock. Something permanent. I knew he was right. The trailer that had been my salvation was now our limitation. We'd hit capacity, turning away almost as many customers as we served. The idea of a restaurant terrified me. More staff, more overhead, more ways to fail spectacularly. But the idea of not growing Earl's legacy when we had the chance felt like a betrayal. Joe was prepared to invest another $50,000 to make it happen. Combined with our earnings from both locations, we had enough to do something special. Not chain restaurant special. Earl would have hated that, but authentically, uniquely ours. We found the perfect spot on the edge of downtown Lubbock, an old filling station from the 1950s with plenty of outdoor space. The red brick building had character coming out of its ears, and a history almost as rich as Earl's barbecue. The owner was retiring and had turned down 3 offers from developers wanting to tear it down for something modern. When we told him our plans, his face lit up like Christmas morning. "My daddy used to take me to Earl's weekend cookouts," he said, handing over keys. "About time this town got that back." The renovation took 2 months of sweat, cursing, and more money than I care to admit. We kept the original garage doors, restoring them so they could open fully in good weather, connecting the indoor space to a sprawling yard that reminded me of Grandma Ruth's backyard. Inside, we built a proper kitchen around Earl's restored grill. Now the centerpiece of the operation, visible to diners as a reminder of where it all began. The decor was pure 60s nostalgia filtered through a Texas lens, neon signs casting warm light over worn wooden tables, vintage concert posters of Johnny Cash and Elvis framed on the walls, and a genuine jukebox rescued from a closing diner 3 counties over. Above the register hung a restored photograph of Earl and Ruth, smiling in front of that same Weber grill, with Earl's words painted beneath. "Barbecue isn't just food, it's memories." We kept the menu simple. The same offerings from the trailer, each perfected over time, plus a few sides Grandma Ruth had been famous for among family and friends. Quality over quantity, soul over flash, just like Earl would have wanted. Opening night for Smoke and Memory was set for June 15th, exactly 1 year after I'd stood in that lawyer's office, clutching a rusty key and a worn notebook, the family failure who'd inherited junk while everyone else got treasure. Liz had been by my side through every step of the journey, from radio interviews to late nights taste-testing sauce variations. What had started as reconnecting with an old friend had grown into something neither of us had expected, but both of us had needed. She was a voice of reason when I spiraled into worry, the cheerleader when I needed confidence, and increasingly, the person I wanted to share every victory with, no matter how small. The evening of the opening, the restaurant was packed with familiar faces. Joe proudly showing off the kitchen to friends. Marge, still the unofficial town crier, holding court at a corner table. Old Fred gruffly approving of the free senior meals we continued from the trailer days. Local musicians played Elvis covers in the yard, while Texas Fireflies created their own light show in the gathering dusk. Liz wore a vintage-style dress that made her look like she'd stepped straight out of the 60s, her smile brighter than any neon sign we'd installed. As we watched the crowd from a quiet corner, I realized I'd never felt more certain about anything than I did about her. I planned something special, terrifying but special. In my pocket was my grandmother's ring, passed down from my mother who'd insisted I take it when she saw how I looked at Liz. The sound system had been prepped, the song selected, my courage bolstered by a year of facing fears and coming out the other side. When Can't Help Falling in Love began playing, the crowd instinctively made space in the center of the yard. I took Liz's hand, ignoring her confused expression, and led her into that space. "Jack Harper, what are you doing?" she whispered, her eyes widening as I pulled her close for a dance. My dancing hasn't improved since high school, a fact made painfully clear when I nearly tripped over my own feet within seconds. The crowd's laughter was warm rather than mocking, and Liz's eyes sparkled with amusement and something deeper. Halfway through the song, I dropped to one knee, not entirely intentionally as I stumbled again, but I recovered with what I hoped looked like grace. The ring box emerged from my pocket, somehow not lost despite my general clumsiness. "Liz," I said, my voice surprisingly steady for a man whose heart was threatening to burst from his chest. "You've been there for every step of this journey. You believed in me when I barely believed in myself. I want you to be part of whatever comes next. Will you marry me?" Her laughter, that full-bodied laugh I'd loved since we were teenagers, rang out across the yard. "Jack Harper, you still dance like you're 17 years old and have 2 left feet," she said, wiping a tear from her eye. "But yes, absolutely yes." The crowd erupted in cheers as I slid the ring onto her finger. In that moment, looking up at her surrounded by the life we'd built from the ashes of what had seemed like failure, I could almost feel Earl watching, giving me that knowing wink of his. The celebration continued late into the night, the restaurant's opening and our engagement blending into one joyful event that felt like exactly what Earl would have wanted: food, music, and love bringing people together. I was making the rounds, checking on customers and accepting congratulations, when I spotted them, Uncle Roy, Travis, and Becky, standing awkwardly by the entrance as if unsure they were welcome. My first instinct was wariness. Their last visit hadn't exactly been friendly, but something in their posture seemed different, less entitled, more uncertain. I approached them slowly, conscious of the eyes following me across the room. People knew the story by now. The jealous family, the attempted takeover, the competing barbecue joint Roy had tried and failed to launch in the months after the festival. Turns out, sauce made with resentment doesn't taste good. Roy looked older somehow, the arrogance drained from his face. "Place looks good, Jack," he said, his typical bluster nowhere to be found. "Real good." Travis and Becky nodded in agreement, their eyes taking in the packed restaurant with something that might have been respect. The silence stretched between us, years of family tension condensed into an uncomfortable moment that could go either way. I thought about Earl, about all I'd learned from him beyond recipes and barbecue techniques, about forgiveness and the true meaning of legacy, about what he would do in this moment. "Come on in," I said, stepping aside to let them enter. "Earl would have wanted to feed you." I led them to a reserved table near the kitchen, signaling to Miguel to bring out a selection of everything we offered. Roy sat stiffly, clearly uncomfortable with being on the receiving end of generosity from a family member they'd all written off. "We came to say congratulations," Becky said, breaking the silence. "On everything, the restaurant, the engagement, all of it. It's impressive what you built, Jack." I poured a small cup of smoky gold number 9 for each of them. "Thanks. It's been a journey." Roy cleared his throat. "I was wrong," he said, the words clearly difficult for him. "About the grill, about you. Earl knew what he was doing all along." It wasn't full apology. Roy probably wasn't capable of that. But it was as close as he'd ever come. I nodded, accepting the olive branch for what it was. There was no point in harboring resentment when life had proven me right in the most satisfying way possible. To Earl, I said, raising my own cup of sauce, who saw value where others saw junk. They raised their cups, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt something like family connection with them, not forgetting the past, but perhaps moving beyond it. Later that night, after the last customers had left and even the cleanup crew had gone home, I sat alone in the empty restaurant. Elvis played softly from the jukebox. I walked the line as I looked around at what we'd built. 1 year ago, I'd been a jobless mechanic with mounting debt and a family that saw me as nothing more than a disappointment. Now I sat in my own restaurant, an engaged man, a successful business owner, and the keeper of a legacy that meant more to me than any amount of money ever could. "A real dream isn't just what you hold," Earl had written in his notebook. "It's what lives on in others after you're gone." As I ran my hand over the worn surface of that 1963 Weber grill, now permanently installed as the heart of our kitchen, I felt a catch in my throat. Earl had given me a rusty grill, a tattered notebook, and a trailer key, items that had seemed worthless to everyone else, but contained everything I needed to find my way. The Texas night was warm outside, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Through the open garage doors, I could smell mesquite and hickory on the breeze, mingling with the lingering scent of smoky gold number 9 that permeated every inch of the place. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor. Sometimes failure is just success that hasn't found the right ingredients yet. And sometimes the thing you need most in life comes disguised as the thing you want least. Earl understood that barbecue was never just about the food. It was about bringing people together, creating moments that turned into memories, sharing something made with love. It was about connection in a world that too often pushes us apart. As I locked up the night, I paused at the door, looking back at the photograph of Earl and Ruth smiling down from above the register. "We did it, Grandpa," I whispered into the quiet restaurant. "We really did it." I stepped out into the Texas night, a man transformed not by fame or money, but by the simple understanding that had been Earl's gift all along. The most valuable things in life can't be measured in dollars or listed in a will. They're passed from heart to heart, kept alive through actions rather than objects, and enriched by being shared. And sometimes they start with nothing more than a rusty grill, a worn notebook, and the faith of someone who sees what others don't. The rest, as they say in Texas, is just smoke and story.